now.
I'm sure that Pastor Terry could corroborate that sometimes the passages that are easiest to understand are the most difficult to explain. And tonight we're going to look at two events that Luke describes in his gospel. The one event is the familiar story of the disciples casting out and sailing on the lake when a storm comes up and the waves go and water is beginning to pour into the boat, and Jesus is sound asleep. And the disciples panic and call him to rescue them from being in jeopardy and in peril. And the other one we're going to talk about is that when the boat landed, Jesus and the disciples got out of the boat, and they were greeted by a welcoming committee of a legion of demons that possessed a man. And the welcoming committee was not what you really expect to see, because a man was living in a tomb, in a grave, and he was completely naked, and he was being controlled by demons. And we know the story that Jesus commanded the demons to depart from the man, and they departed into a herd of pigs that ran off the cliff and drowned. Now, that pretty straightforward stories. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about faith, and we're going to talk about fear. And I called tonight's lesson fear because this is the word that Luke describes the reaction that many of the witnesses to these events had to what Jesus did. And when we talk about fear, it reminds me back when I was a very young kid, and they were telling us stories about how Jesus is watching over you and how Jesus is always there. And my imagination took off. And in the middle of the night, I woke up thinking that Jesus was in the room. And I was so petrified I couldn't move. Now, I'm sure that all of us had some experience like that where we saw a ghost or we saw something we didn't understand and we froze. Well, we're going to talk about the kind of fear that the disciples and the people that witnessed Jesus casting out the legion of demons witnessed, and their reaction, and why Luke described their reaction one as being afraid or fear. I found this passage that's in Isaiah 41:10, where God is talking, and he says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This is our Lord speaking about being with those that belong to him. And we always talk about how Jesus is in heaven right now interceding for us. And when I look up the word interceding, and when I think of that, is I look at advocating for us. The devil's always trying to accuse us of things, and Jesus intercedes. But what these passages, Jesus is doing more than interceding. He's intervening. He is getting involved. He is taking action on behalf of those that he wants to help. And when you talk about intercession being more verbal and argumentative and persuasive, when you get the Lord intervening, you're going to see the power and the authority of the Lord taking action. And we're going to see how Jesus intervened in these two events to actually rescue his disciples or rescue this demon-possessed man from the demons that were possessing him. So we're going to look at these two things, and we're going to look at it from the focus of fear. So when we look at this, there's a number of questions that come up that set the basis for tonight's lesson. How should we deal with circumstances which threaten our safety and well-being, especially circumstances over which we have no power or control? Sometimes the older I get, I think more and more that I have less power and control over anything in my life. My doctors tell me what to do, what to eat. My body tells me what I can't do. There's a lot of circumstances that come up, and you can't be older like the rest of us are without having some, I will say, concern, but it could be fear about what's going to happen. Am I going to get dementia? Am I going to end up in a nursing home? Am I going to be suddenly taken from this earth because of an accident? These things happen all the time. If you came into my office, you'll see a back room of files. Those files represent clients that our office has represented since 1975. And I can tell you that if I were to statistically add them up, 95% of those people have passed on. Very few remain. So when we have a circumstance, do we trust Jesus to intervene and rescue us? Do we believe that Jesus has the power and authority to save us? We can answer yes, but do we really believe that? Do we believe that Jesus is aware of the circumstances which threaten us and that Jesus is willing to rescue us? And when Jesus intervenes and rescues us, how should we respond? So our discussion tonight is going to look at aspects of these 4 questions. And we're going to look at when Jesus intervened to calm the wind and the waves which threatened the lives of the disciples. We learned that his disciples responded in fear. When Jesus confronted the multitude of demons which possessed the man who was driven into madness, we learned that the demons responded to Jesus in fear. When the people who fed the herd of swine witnessed Jesus intervening to cast out the demons, and the people of the nearby village found out what Jesus had done, they responded in fear. We've all experienced circumstances which threaten our well-being. However, many times we fail to recognize from those circumstances which threaten us, believing that things will either work out by themselves, or that we are able to respond by ourselves in a way that enables us to rescue ourselves without God's help. Sometimes when I'm in a circumstance where I'm under a lot of pressure or threatened, the last person I think about is Jesus. I'm thinking about poor is me. How am I going to get out of this mess? How much time do I have? What are my resources? I'm already trying to put all the pieces together. But can you imagine turning to God and God appearing present, visibly with us to go through these circumstances? He's saying he's willing to carry the yoke with us. We don't think of Jesus appearing physically because we know that we'll see him again physically when we go to heaven or when he returns to gather his church. But just because we can't see him doesn't mean he's not present with us. Present with us when we have church, present with us all the time. In tonight's lesson, Jesus is not only physically present to rescue those in peril, but demonstrates his power and authority as he intervenes, as he takes action. He's just not advocating, now he's taking action. What if God or an angel actually appeared to intervene to protect or rescue us from harm's way? What would we do? How would we react? We know in the Bible, whenever an angel appeared, the reaction was always one of fear. So much so that the first thing that the angel said, and I'll quote the angel, "Do not be afraid." Anyone who witnessed a tornado touching down or a lightning strike knows the fear of being so close to something so powerful. I know I was 5 miles away from a tornado that touched down right off in Kansas, right off the Missouri River. And it was 5 miles away, but it was right there. And I was afraid. The power of the tornado. I remember in the movie Twister, they called it the finger of God. And anybody that's been experienced lightning striking near them, I was running across a field with a running mate, and lightning struck the field where we were running. It was frightening. The power of nature. And yet, in tonight's lesson, Jesus, with a word, intervenes and controls the power of nature. We're going to look at these two events where Jesus demonstrated his almighty power and authority, and the reaction of those who witnessed Jesus displaying his power over the forces of nature and the power and authority over evil spirits. Luke's narrative about those who witnessed the power and authority of Jesus describes them, as I said before, reacting with fear. What do these two events teach us about how we should respond to Jesus when we are facing difficult circumstances which puts us in jeopardy? That's what we're going to learn tonight. So let's talk about what the two circumstances where Jesus intervened and caused fear. They're found in Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25, and Luke chapter 8, verses 25 through 39. The first event is in Luke 8, verses 22 through 25, where Jesus rebukes the wind and the waves. Starting with verse 22. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water, and they were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased. And there was calm. But he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, "Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." Now, the second incident that we're going to look at is when Jesus cast out a multitude of demons into a herd of swine. Starting with verse 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there he met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered into him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go into the abyss. Now a herd of many swine were feeding there on the mountain, so they begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. When those who fed the hogs saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus, and found the man from whom the demon had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They also had seen it told to him by what means he had been demon-possessed was healed. Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And he got into the boat and returned. Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house, and tell what great things God has done for you." And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. The main message that I want you to receive from tonight's lesson is that as believers, we frequently look at Jesus as being too far away to help us, and that instead of intervening to help us, Jesus allows us to work things out on our own. The scriptures teach that Jesus is continuously interceding on our behalf, even when we don't ask. The two events where Jesus rebuked the storm and calmed the waters, and where Jesus rebuked and cast out demons, reveal the almighty power and authority of Jesus, who is willing to intervene on our behalf and teaches us that instead of responding in fear, we should respond in praise, gratitude, and worship for what Jesus does to rescue us from our circumstances. So we're going to look at three parts of our lesson tonight. Jesus intervening or intervention caused fear instead of praise, gratitude, and worship. We're going to talk about the fear of the disciples, the fear of the demons, and the fear of the people from the village. And then we'll have some discussion questions that will expand our understanding of these scriptures. So let's go to the fear of the disciples. Jesus had instructed his disciples to cross over a lake in a boat. Luke 8:22. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." And they launched out. Then Jesus fell asleep. And while he was sleeping, a windstorm came down and placed the disciples in peril. Verse 23. But as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. The Sea of Galilee is a sea where it is surrounded with mountains where you could be on calm waters. And just like the zephyrs that in Nevada, a windstorm can come up and shake up the whole sea, and it becomes very violent and dangerous. The disciples were afraid of the wind and the waves caused by the storm. Verse 24. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." They were scared for their lives. After Jesus had fallen asleep in the boat, a storm came upon them, and their boat was filling with water. The disciples were helpless and were afraid that they would die. Their first fear was of the elements of nature. Their fear was real because their lives were in jeopardy. The disciples turned to Jesus, woke him up, and asked Jesus to save them. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." Now it is not clear what the disciples expected Jesus to do, nor did they know how exactly Jesus would save them. Did they think that Jesus would allow them to perish even while Jesus was asleep? You think that if Jesus is in the boat, he's going to allow the boat to sink? He could be asleep and still act to intercede on their behalf. With a single word of rebuke, Jesus caused the wind and the waves to calm down. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was calm. But he said to them, "Where is your faith?" I can imagine being on that boat, and you could hear the howling of the wind, the crashing of the waves. Jesus speaks the wind and the waves, and then there's silence, immediate silence. I can even imagine what was going through the disciples' mind. Having witnessed Jesus' power and authority over the storm, the disciples were no longer afraid of the storm, but they were afraid by what Jesus had done. In verse 25, and they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, "Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." The disciples had witnessed Jesus demonstrating a power which his disciples recognized was greater than the elements of nature. Yet the disciples were afraid. Well, why were the disciples afraid? Were they afraid about Jesus' power and authority over the wind and the violent waves? Of course, that was a tremendous demonstration of the power and authority of Jesus, but it was the authority exercised to rescue the disciples. Were they afraid of Jesus himself? If Jesus could calm the storms, there's nothing that Jesus can't do. Who is this man? Luke's narrative does not reveal that Jesus' disciples were grateful for what Jesus had done, or that they praised and worshiped Jesus for rescuing them. He simply says that the disciples were afraid. You'd think, I can remember watching my grandkids swim, and one of them would get in a little trouble, and I'd dive into the water and take him to the side of the pool. And the first thing I'd say is, "Thank you, Grandpa. You saved me." Here the disciples were perishing in a storm, afraid of the storm. Jesus rescues them, and Luke doesn't say a word of gratitude or praise for Jesus. Simply, they responded in fear. Now let's talk about the fear of the demons. When the boat landed on the shore, Jesus and his disciples encountered a man that was demon-possessed. Starting with verse 26, chapter 8. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there he met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. Apparently, this man had been possessed by demons for a long time. The narrative infers that one or more demons had taken possession of the man, and previous attempts to shackle, restrain, or control the man were unsuccessful. Verses 28 and 29. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of Man, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. And he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Not only did the demons possess this man, they gave this man extraordinary powers to break shackles and bonds that people used to try and restrain this man. And they drove this man into madness out into the wilderness, where he slept in a cemetery, in a tomb. The man had been driven out of the city and lived in one of the tombs of the cemetery outside the city. When Jesus approached the demon-possessed man, the demon immediately recognized Jesus as the Son of God and was afraid that Jesus would condemn him with eternal judgment by throwing him into the abyss along with Satan and his other followers. Verses 30 and 31. Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him, and they begged him that he would not command them to go into the abyss. The demons were afraid of Jesus. They feared Jesus. They recognized that Jesus was God, and he had the power and authority to throw them into the abyss. Well, what are they talking about? Demons knew that ultimately their fate was to be cast into the bottomless pit after Jesus' victory over Satan and his followers. This comes from Revelations chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. The demons recognized who Jesus was. They knew enough about their ultimate fate that they feared that Jesus was going to judge them right there and throw them into the bottomless pit. And they begged Jesus not to do that. Did they recognize that the time was not right? Because the tribulation had not taken place, the complete victory over Satan had not occurred. Well, Jesus knew the timing. Knowing that the time for casting Satan and his followers into the abyss has not arrived, the demons asked Jesus not to allow them to be sent into the herd of swine instead. Luke chapter 32 and verses 32 and 33. Now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain, so they begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. So the demons were asking Jesus to dispatch them anywhere, anywhere, but not to the abyss. The demons were keenly aware of the wrath of God, which in final judgment would cast them into the abyss. Now, it just happened that the herd of pigs were nearby, and it was convenient for the demons to say, well, we need a place to go. Send us to the pigs. And so to the Jews, the pigs were disgusting as the demons, who displayed their evil by entering into the pigs and driving into the sea to drown. So we have the fear of the demons. They knew who Jesus was. They knew of Jesus's power and authority, and they begged Jesus not to exercise the ultimate power and authority that Jesus would exercise after the tribulation. Now we're going to talk about the fear of the people from the village. Those who were there to feed the pigs witnessed the power and authority of Jesus over the spiritual realm of the demons, and immediately went into the city to report what they witnessed. Verse 34, when those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. This must have caused quite a commotion, as the people in the city came right out of the city to find out for themselves what Jesus had done. Then they went out to see what happened and came to Jesus. And when they got there, they found that the man that they knew for all these years had been demon possessed was no longer possessed. And he was in his right mind, and he was clothed. And they found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. Jesus had intervened and exercised his power and authority over the demons, who he rebuked, judged, and cast out. Instead of praising God or responding in joy to the healing of this demon-possessed man, the people responded in fear. Luke 35:36. And they were afraid. They also, who had seen it, told them by what means he had been demon-possessed was healed. In other words, they told the people, the witnesses to what had happened, told the people in the village, Jesus is the one that cast out the demons. Jesus is the one that changed this demon-possessed maniac from being an unusually powerful, crazy person into being the normal person that you see in front of Jesus' feet. Instead of reverence and praise for what Jesus had done, the people were filled with fear. And the people also asked for Jesus to go away from them. Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. And he got into the boat and returned. Some scholars believe that the people asked Jesus to go away because they didn't want Jesus to destroy their other herds in order to protect their livelihood. Even though Jesus had saved the demon-possessed man, the people didn't want Jesus to save them. So we get to what I think is really the lesson of this two events. The only person who responded to Jesus intervening to save him was the man who was rescued from the demons who possessed him. Verse 38 starts, now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. He didn't want Jesus to depart from him. He wanted to stay right at Jesus' feet. But Jesus sent him away, saying, return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you. And the man went away and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Instead of asking Jesus to go away, the man begged Jesus to allow him to be with him. Instead of being afraid of Jesus, the man went through the city where he once was an outcast, proclaiming what Jesus had done for him and praising and worshiped Jesus as his Savior. So there's a lot of irony and contrast in these two events. And I put them together for the purposes of us understanding that Jesus is always willing to intervene to help us. And Jesus has all the power and authority to help us through our circumstances. And that when Jesus does intervene, instead of being afraid, we need to praise Jesus, we need to show our gratitude, and we need to worship Jesus as our Savior. So with that, we're going to get into the discussion of Jesus' intervention causing fear instead of praise, gratitude, and worship.
Hey,
Recording of the inferences. By way of inferences, conclusions, and applications, the scriptures teach that Jesus is constantly interceding on behalf of those who believe in him. Not only does Jesus intercede or advocate on our behalf, he intervenes to help and protect us according to his mercy and grace. While the disciples, out of fear, asked Jesus to save them, when Jesus displayed his power and authority, instead of responding in praise, gratitude, and worship of Jesus as God, the disciples were afraid of the power and authority possessed by Jesus. The demons acknowledged Jesus as God and were afraid of the power and authority possessed by Jesus to cast them down into the abyss. The people from the village witnessed the power and authority of Jesus over the demons, but did not recognize that Jesus was God and wanted nothing to do with the mercy shown by Jesus to intervene and save the demon-possessed man. They rejected Jesus and didn't want anything to do with the salvation Jesus offered. Only the man who Jesus rescued from the demons recognized the power and authority of Jesus without being afraid and responded in gratitude, praise, and worship by proclaiming what Jesus had done to save him. Unlike the disciples who did not have faith that Jesus would intervene to protect them from the storm, we should have faith that Jesus, in his grace and mercy, is continually intervening to exercise his power and authority to overcome the troubles in our lives. And instead of fearing God's wrath and judgment, we should respond in praise, gratitude, and worship for Jesus exercising his divine power and authority on our behalf.
Amen. True.